I don't have an intro planned for this one. Yeah, I do. All right, do as of now. Hey, welcome to 2 Month Review, the only books podcast that's been blocked from YouTube for showing drawn nipples. We are a weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter and 3%, in which we talk about one big book, break it down bit by bit, section by section, analyze it, have fun, make jokes, show nipple. And this season, we are talking about LANARK by Aleister Gray, which is the cover in question, which, to put a little background into the intro,
there she is. There's your girl.
There's a girl. We were our YouTube video. If you're watching this now, you found the right link. The original link was taken down for community standard violations for having drawn breasts on it. So Aleister Gray, who drew this cover, his artwork was no longer allowed to be displayed on YouTube and possibly on Instagram. Who knows? Given its like violation of whatever standards. I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books, joined as always by Brian Wood, author of Joytime Killbox, who is like literally flinching at the drawings of these breasts.
I can't. It's too much for me to handle. This is line drawn black and white sketches of the female form is a little too much for me. I want to burn the Louvre down if we can. And everything in between, please.
And as a special guest this week, we have Tipper Gore. Kaya's dramatist, translator, editor at Open Letter Books. How are you doing, Kaya?
I'm doing great. The only reason my handle was not related to Janet's nips is because I thought Brian would have already taken it. So,
what's interesting? This is a sideways plug, but this morning, like an hour ago, the next Mining the Delkey Archive Substack went out, and it's all about polyamory and women's sexual freedom. So good timing. We got good things going on. If you're not a follower of the Substack, go to Mining the Delkey Archive, follow it. It's free, but if you pay me money, that's awesome. Otherwise, it's got a bunch of stuff about Delkey books, and we'll have quotes from or excerpts from the book I'm writing in the not too distant future. Anyway, so LANARK. I don't have a good game for this one. I figured we'd just like go into this and not really like have any of our bullshit Australian games that were kind of constructed based on the fact that we didn't like Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright. Whereas Aleister Gray is someone I actually really, really, really respect and have always been a huge fan of. Back when I was at Delkey, we reissued Poor Things. And Kaya has a copy of it, and somewhere in front of her is the Delkey Archive Essentials version of Poor Things, which was going to be reissued like a couple years ago in advance of the movie. But HarperCollins and Rupert Murdoch blocked the rights from being renewed, or the person in charge of rights was incapable of working with anyone, which is also a possibility.
That's not a possibility.
We were not allowed to reissue it normally, but there are a certain number of copies that were printed. So Poor Things by Aleister Gray is probably his most famous work nowadays, thanks to the movie starring Emma Stone, which got various, it's in the kitchen, that got various Emmy Award nominations and victories, and is a very famous like book of his. Is kind of like towards the end of his career. But his very first book was LANARK, which I personally read back in like 2002, 2003, and remember absolutely loving, but remember nothing of, which is why we decided to do it this season. So I have some notes on Aleister Gray as a whole. I have some notes on this section of the book, which we went up to page 71, which is through chapter 8 of book 3, since it opens with book 3. But before I babble on too much more, I want to ask get the heat check of what you guys think of this so far. So Brian, what do you think of LANARK or Aleister Gray? Were you familiar with him? Had you heard of this book? Were you like in any way, like what's your vibe?
I know absolutely nothing of him aside from when the movie came out that it was based off of one of his books, which I hadn't read either. I know of the movie. I haven't seen the movie either. So yeah, I know nothing.
Did you like the first 70 pages?
I did. It's very dialogue heavy, but he does it in a way that I really enjoyed it. It feels kind of like just like really effortless. There's interesting things going on as far as like there's weight and like subtext with with the conversations and the scenes, but I like the effortlessness that he does when he's composing his scenes and the dialogue that's happening in it. It kind of reminds me, if we're gonna go like cinematically, I remember the first time watching like Reservoir Dogs with Quentin Tarantino, his early work, where they're sitting around having coffee and everybody's talking and they're just having like these kind of like bantering conversations that feel kind of meaningless and pointless, but each person's about tipping, but each person is revealing their character, who they are, through this like very like effortless, breezy conversation. I feel like the introduction that we had here with the elite was very similar in that sense, and it's really impressive. It's fun. I have no idea where we're going or what we're doing with this, but I don't care.
Yeah. Same. So Kaya, what are your vibes after the first 7 pages?
What are my vibes? I will admit I did not make it to 70 or 71.
What are you doing?
I wasn't gonna lie. What?
What are you doing here?
I was gonna lie, but my reason, or not my reason, but one of my reasons is because I did read the introduction. So I tacked on some extra pages. But no, I agree. I agree with what Brian says, and I mean, I've had the only experience I've had with Aleister Gray prior to this is you, Chad, going to go see the Poor Things movie and talking about it, and also seeing the seeing film clips from it as either trailers or whatever. And also scanning the images from his drawings for things and for Kit, who was laying out that book. Yeah. So I was familiar with the drawings. I'm familiar with the I guess I'll call it the anatomical everything that he incorporates in his sketches. What?
Boobs.
Boobs. Yeah, but I mean, even like Poor Things has a lot of bones, and like even this one has. But like, I was gonna say, this is why Brian is cringing at the boobs, because Brian's wife is a heart surgeon, so Brian would prefer an all or nothing approach to the human body, where that's the all, just go straight to the sinews, just cut it right open. I'm sorry, that's rude. That's my assumption. But yeah, when Brian, you were talking about how it's very smooth and seamless, I mean, there's the chapter where it's just like he wakes up and he's got a dragon arm. There are a few seconds. That's one of the moments where I think for me most notably where you're like, what the fuck? What is this gonna be? Where is this gonna go? But the way his style of writing is so I mean, Chad, you were saying to me a few nights ago that the first time you remember reading it, it was maybe slower going, but it's like the style of writing and the way he presents all of that is so, it's not jarring. Like the imagery of this dragon arm is momentarily jarring, but the way in which it's presented, you just accept it. I didn't feel forced to accept it. I didn't feel forced to just push forward and go with the flow. It was just kind of like, this is the flow. It's always been the flow. And even going back, and Brian mentioned them sitting in the Elite Cafe and all sort of talking, and Sludden or Sluden, however you pronounce it. Even the way he talks, where he's just like, there you are. Like, what took you? There you are. Sit down. Like, let's, shoot the shit. And then all the other friends come in and they're like, oh, it's the mystery man. Like, like take care. Like everything is, I agree that everything feels very smooth and flowing, and everyone so far that has been introduced just kind of you just sort of you accept. You have to accept what is going on because they've already accepted it. And my last tangent before you start saying what you're probably going to say, but my last tangent is that as I'm talking about this out loud and the experience of just kind of going with the flow, which is quite heavy, and that's not a menstruation metaphor, is that there's something, it reminds me of Ten Shui in that regard, where her writing is a little more punctuated, I think. But it reminds me of that kind of like, this is just what it is. Like, yeah, those snow leopards are panthers now, and it's not a mistake. It's just what they are, because that's what happens in this book. And yeah, the cobblestone stones turn into frogs because that's what happens in this book. So I don't know. I don't know if I enjoy it. And I want to hear if Brian enjoys it. I want to hear, Chad, if you are enjoying it again. But I am very interested in where this is going. I'm not interested in where this is going, because I don't think I have any idea, or I don't think I could make any possible bets on where the fuck this is going. But it feels very comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with all that. Like I was saying, it's like it's slower than I thought, because it's like disorienting, but not as disorienting as I thought it would be. Remembered it being like so in this issue of the Review of Contemporary Fiction on Stanley Elkin and Alistair Gray, the two people I'm like reading the most of right now. Like, what a fucking heavy hitter of an issue. There's an introduction to Alistair Gray by Mark Axelrod, who has a book out from Delkey called The Mad Something of Malcolm Malarkey. I forget what the title is.
The Mad Diary of Malcolm Malarkey.
Yeah. And he has an interview with Gray, and it's interesting because Gray lays out like a few things. Like, he talks about his inspirations, which we could talk about if you guys are interested. But I thought there was a longer part in here, which I'm not finding. And I don't know where I read this, if it wasn't in here, where he talks about how these sections of the book are like made, or they're based on Dante's Inferno. So like all that kind of feels a little bit clear, where you go up to the elite, you go down into the basement, you're on like the sort of plane where our character LANARK is like walking, and there's no sun, and it's very purgatory like. He goes through a mouth. Just to recap this story, he meets some people, or this part of the book, this guy is in like a world that's kind of like not real, doesn't quite follow our normal laws. He meets a bunch of people like Sludden, like you say, and the women who are like obsessed with him, with Sludden, that is, including Rima, who LANARK gets involved with. LANARK lives in like a house. He writes a story about his life, and the story about his life is basically like, I don't know how the fuck I got here. I was on a bus, and I got off a bus, and this little dude was like, here's how you get like money, and you go and wait in this line, you get money, and you go to a house, and the little dude, what's his name?
Gloopy. How could you forget? Gloopy.
I was thinking of that fucktard from like the Harry Potter books. Like, what is that? Dobby.
Neville? Oh, Dobby, Neville Longbottom. Sorry, Neville fans. Dobby, yeah.
Yeah.
Gloopy's gonna get a sock.
Got to get a sock. Get the fuck out of here. What a stupid book. But I was thinking of that name. But Gloopy helps him get like money, and then he like goes and lives in this house. He writes that story that basically like, I don't know how I got here. This is what I'm doing. He meets these people, and then he goes down a mouth that's speaking to him in a graveyard, and he ends up in an institute where he is being treated for his dragon hide, which is grown over his whole arm, which is like some scaly thing that's grown over his arm that he feels like the arm's gonna like bash people, which only seems natural to me. Like, if you had a good scale arm, you'd just whip that around and smack people all over the place. And then they treat it, and then he's a doctor, and that's where we sort of end. I meant to read ahead to the end of this part, which is like only 30 more pages, but like it's a weird, because we end like in media res of like a section that is intentionally surreal. Anyways, like he does talk about it being like based somewhat on Dante's Inferno, but also Paradiso and also Purgatorio. So it does kind of have those levels to it. And the thing that, what was I going to say about I forget what the other thing I was going to say was, but anyways, like it does have that. And he is like playing around with that. One thing that's interesting about his backstory is that for anyone who wants to know more, there is an episode of this podcast called Anthony Burgess's 99 great books. So Anthony Burgess, who wrote Clockwork Orange, was asked by The Guardian, when he was alive, to write up like what his 99 favorite books were, the best books of all time, 99 best books. And LANARK is one of them. And so there's a podcast that goes through all 99 of these books, and he talked about LANARK in one of them. And the guy who talks about it explains that like most people know Alistair Gray now in Scotland as an artist. Like all these drawings, all the stuff that goes throughout here are his drawings. Like he went to art school. He's very, very, very like he was well trained. He in art and visual arts, and he actually like made a ton of murals. He did a bunch of like artistic things, all of which are like gone, minus like one or two from that period are like still existent. One of them is at a cathedral that I think is called, it's an auditorium, and I'm going to mispronounce this like pretty wildly, I'm sure, but it looks like Oran Moore Theater with accents over the O's. But that's the one that still exists, and it's one of the largest murals in all of Scotland. But otherwise, he was always known as a visual artist, and then he wrote this book and became super, super famous. And that fame from the writing generated like now that when he was still alive, he would do artistic works, and they're like honored throughout Scotland. But up until the point that he wrote LANARK, none of that was existent. Like his visual life becomes like important after these books start coming out, which I only mention because he has this wonderful quote in which he says that he found, well, this is paraphrasing, but he says that he found writing tiring and that painting gave him energy, which is wonderful because I find fucking writing tiring too.
Well, those are the two art forms that Sledden recommends him essentially, right? Is like, you should go write. And then when he reads the book or reads the manuscript, he's like, fuck, maybe you should paint instead.
Your words are uninteresting. The other thing that
art is the only work open to people who can't get along with others and still want to be special.
Yes.
Love it. I love it. There's so many things in this section of the book that are so direct. Like they're just so direct. And I think that's maybe kind of what you both are talking about in terms of like the ease of reading it and how it goes down. Like there's like they just sort of state what's going on, or state like the kind of philosophy behind it in certain ways. Like that line about like write a book. And you're like, why? Because artists are the only people who can't get along can do this, like, and want to be special. Like it's very direct. There's not a lot of
I think the Leonardo da Vinci notebook epigraph or epitaph is really important, especially when you're thinking about Dante's Inferno, right? Right from the get-go, creatures shall be seen on earth who will always be fighting one another with the greatest losses and frequent deaths on either side. There will be no bounds to their malice. By their strong limbs and vast forests of the world shall be laid low. Like this idea of like, it's kind of like, it reminds me of like Revelation or like biblical prophecy for end times. There's this quote verse from 2 Timothy. In the last days, perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, lovers of pleasure, other than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. From such people turn away. Like it has that same feeling, that same connotation. I think that Dante's Inferno influence really makes a lot of sense.
Have either of you read that? I have not.
I've read Dante's Inferno. I never read Paradiso or Purgatorio. Like they were so like secondary in terms. I might have read Purgatorio, to be honest, but like they're so like not talked about in terms of like the GRE test, which is what I was like primarily studying for at that time. They're just not part of it, so I never went through with the rest of them. But I know the core concept and like
I just did Inferno, Paradise Lost, and Utopia, so that way I could kind of like have a basic understanding and then not look dumb at a cocktail party. But that was it. I'm not going to answer any Jeopardy questions.
No, I mean, and I've heard from criticism that like Paradiso is really boring, which only makes sense. Like we're only really interested in hell.
Yeah.
Like and the idea of Dante's Inferno being like walking through hell, being led by, who is it? I forget what the person's leading him through hell.
Gloopy.
But what is it? Yeah, Goopy and Dobby team up and like lead him through hell. But it's basically like showing off all the like the horrors of hell and all the various sins. is fascinating. Like it's wonderful to like to read, but like yeah, the rest of it I think is less interesting. I think than a general bit because hell is great. One of the
I think
things
a
that
modern day hell would be Blippi would probably be your tour guide.
yeah.
You'd be stuck with Blippi through the different substrata of hell. It only gets worse.
I can see it.
Oh no.
Oh my god. It's so fresh. I don't think Alex has watched Blippi in a year and a half, 2 years, but it's so fresh.
Oh god.
I'm still recovering.
I mean, hell for me is watching Bluey every day, so I'm already living that life.
This is why you were not a dentist or a dental tech. You wouldn't get it.
Don't get me started on dental techs, who I'm obsessed with and in love with. So
I also read the introduction, and I have an idea, and I'm wondering. I'll bounce it off you and see what you think. But I love this part where like it's Boyd is the introduction, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that like he somehow like shoehorns in his own book.
Yes.
The introduction. Right? Like looking back at it now, it seems more interesting that I came to review LANARK, Gray's first novel, a month after my own first novel, A Good Man in Africa, had been published. A Good Man in Africa had been reviewed, and
it's so funny. And
I want to write a fictional introduction where the introduction is just the person talking about their own work for the entire introduction, and never like hardly like but barely pops up every now and then for a breath of air to mention what they're supposed to be reviewing or introducing in the first place, and just make the whole thing about themselves.
That would be perfect. I think that I tried.
I'm doing that for a book where I want to have an introduction made by a fake person where they only talk about their own book the whole time.
So that's really funny that you mentioned that, and for a few reasons. One, like I totally tracked that too, and I love the part where he's like, "Well, books 3 and 4 are like surreal and weird. They're not really good because I really like realism. All my books are realist, and my books are really great realist novels. So I like parts 1 and 2. And there is like just to like to hone that in, there is a bit in this interview with Mark Axelrod, which seems not contentious, but Aleister Gray seems a little disinterested in the questions. But at one part, he's like, this is like a weird where it's 2 books. There's books 3 and 4, which are set in this like surreal world of Unthank. And then there's like 1 and 2 that are more realistic that come in the middle. Like, what is this? What is this? How does this hold together? And Aleister Gray's like, dude, it's simple. Book 1 and book 2 are ages like 5 till 14, and then 14 till 21, and then books 3 and 4 are like 30 to 34, and 34 till the end. Like it's not complicated. And you're just like, okay, like that's great. But also in Aleister Gray's later books, I don't think it's 1982 Janine, but it might be. But I think Fall of Kelvin Walker is one that has this. He wrote fake blurbs for himself, so most of his books are covered in fake introductions and fake blurbs that are generally negative, that are generally like what you're saying, Brian, of like, they're like, oh, this person's just talking about themselves. Most of his the blurbs he has on there is like, this is one of the most disgusting books that have ever been written. If you're really into like really bad BDSM and whatnot, like this is a book for you. Like they're all like this like takedowns. And so he did play around with like that concept of like not having the artifice, the paratext of it, so to speak, not being like accurate and not being like related to like his actual book.
Here's what I love about this introduction is if we skip over to page 15, for when wandering the city, he had visited public libraries and read enough stories to know there were 2 kinds. One kind was a sort of written cinema with plenty of action and hardly any thought. The other kind was about clever, unhappy people, often authors themselves, who thought a lot but didn't do very much. And so it's like the introduction person is like, I'm writer number 1, and this book is writer number 2. It's okay, I guess.
So funny. That's one thing that I did like. I thought that there would be more humor within this. There's a certain joyousness, like Poor Things. Not to get off too much on that, and I'm sure at some point we'll talk about the movie of that. Like it's streaming now, guys. You can actually watch it. It's not my favorite movie, but it's not bad. And I'd watch Emma Stone do anything basically. I like have a big actress crush on her, not like a other one, but there's like various weird senses of humor in this, but it is pretty straight, which is what I was sort of surprised by and why I thought it was like a little bit slower. Like it's not like comedic, but in many ways I always think of Alistair Gray as being like kind of a comedic author.
Can I ruin Emma Stone for you real quick?
Please do. I mean, I need that.
Okay.
Take it down.
I was watching one of those like Jimmy Kimmel mean tweets from like 4 or 5 years ago, and there's one on Emma Stone that she reads, and the mean tweet was, Emma Stone looks like she'd smell like cat piss. And I could never unremember it. And every time I see Emma Stone, I think about cleaning a letterbox now because of that meme. She read that mean tweet. And
is it because her facial expressions? Like,
I guess, I don't know why, but it was like funny enough where it just tracked perfectly. I don't know why. And her reading it obviously makes it even better. But that's all I think of now is like, Emma Stone looks like she smells like cat piss.
Wait till you watch Poor Things. That would definitely be part of it. Like, definitely fits in there.
I absolutely loved her though in The Curse.
The Curse. Oh my God, that's where like this sounds dirty.
It was unwatchable in such the right way.
Yep. This is gonna sound worse than I mean it to, but there's that episode in which she just walks and the car is trailing her. The camera's trailing her from inside a car. It never comes back up. It's the beginning of an episode, but it goes on for like 5 minutes and there's no explanation of it later. But I was like, I could watch her walk indefinitely. Like I just watch Emma Stone walk.
You're creepy.
I know that sounds super creepy, but literally like the way she holds herself in that show and like presents as like that character it's mesmerizing. She's so good. She's so good in there. But anyways, back to LANARK. So I don't know where we want to go with
this is the same person that does La La Land, so she's an enigma, right? Like, because you can't hate somebody more than watching La La Land.
I won't ever see that movie because
don't. It's the worst thing ever. It makes you hate. It's like one of those. It's like when people say "Only in New York." It's like it's the LA version of people saying "Only in New York." Am I right?
Yeah.
It's brutal.
It looks awful. She's in like she's there before I saw Poor Things, they had this whole sequence, like one of those like pre-movie like ad type things, but it's like content, not ads, and it was about her dancing. And it was like all these clips from like everywhere that she's ever done dancing before, and she's in like a famous music video like for a band that I love. And I was like, oh, this is weird, but she's like very into dance, strangely. And that movie on there as well. La La Land was like obviously shown in there.
Mm-hmm. Like the person that played Monica in Friends, she was in that Bruce Springsteen video.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Which that just came up because that's like 40 years old. Oh, it's by Will Butler. She's in Anna, the music video for Anna by Will Butler, the guy that's related to the brother of Win Butler from Arcade Fire. That's what it is. It's a great song. That'll be the opening song to this podcast. So everyone who's listening to this we'll find that out shortly. But in terms of the book itself, were there any like points that stood out to you? So I mean, we kind of like went through aside from Kaya showing the opening of book 3.
Well, you say the opening of book 3, but it's the opening of the book. That's one thing that stood out to me. Book 3 it comes first. Yeah,
so it is structured exactly like Sound and the Fury. It goes 3, 1, 2, 4, which is how Sound and the Fury goes too. If you put it in chronological order, it's like the Benji part, and then Quentin goes back in time, and then oh my God, Caddy, and then Jason. It's the same order, 3, 1, 2, 4. So it's not like super out of nowhere, but like it is also like is unique in that like I think it's like foregrounds itself so well. Like Sound of the Fury, you just figure that out as you go. It's not like labeled as such. The parts aren't. I don't even think the parts have names. I haven't looked at the book in ages though, so forgive me if I'm wrong.
I don't even know. No, you're right. I mean, it doesn't feel slapdash. It's like again, like going to Brian's point of the smoothness of it. You're like, oh, it's book 3, and then you like it just okay. We're in book 3.
Yeah, we start in book 3, and we start in a place that's surreal, that's very Kafka influenced, and he talks about like his influences as a reader in this like in this interview as well, and he talks about like he says like the books that like turned him on and that like helped him write this book, so to speak, was like the first book was probably like the question is like not that either text, Giles Goat Boy by John Barth or St. Petersburg by Andre Belly, not that either of these texts directly influenced your approach to Lanark, but what are some of the texts that did? And he says the first book was probably Shaw's Adventures of the Black Girl in Search of God. For my father once told me that he read it to me when I was very small, and I kept asking him, will the next God be the real one, Daddy? And then Ibsen's Peer Gynt when he was an adolescent. And then he also was very fond of Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, but did not enjoy it because he did not want to become a born-again Christian. Then there's Melville's Moby Dick and his combination of great idioms, natural history, factory ship, oil industry, Shakespearean monologue, Yankee wisecracks, Wordsworthian meditation, then Kafka. So we have this like very Kafkaesque bit that we're in. But one of the things I think is interesting that you meant or that you showed us, Kai, is that the drawing for book 3 is the Divine Comedy, is Dante's Divine Comedy.
I was going to ask about that, but
yeah. So there's a woman. I don't know all of the Latin, but it seems pretty straightforward. Where there's like Providence up above on top, and this woman is holding up. The woman of life is holding up a world in between what is both like grace and also like badness. And that happens on the bottom as well. So there's like a middle section that says book 3. And then the bottom of this particular picture has like experience on one side, truth on the other. And then at the very bottom is death and oblivion. And that sort of tracks with like this as well as we take like Lanark himself as like sort of like moving through these realms through these first 70 pages, is that he does physically go up the stairs to meet with the people in the elite cafe, which for anyone who hasn't read this, the elite cafe is like in like a movie theater that may or may not ever show real movies. I think it shows pornos maybe.
It certainly sounds like it. Yeah.
It sounds like it shows pornos, but it also doesn't seem like it actually shows movies. Like it's just existent. And there's a cafe at the top where he meets these people and they're like, hey, you're the mystery guy. What are you doing here? You need a woman. Here's Rima. We'll set him up with Rima, or we'll set him up with this person. And they do send him up with Rima. And then he does like live in this boarding house in a world in which there's no dawn. Like his whole existence at the beginning of the book, when we're first introduced to him, is in this movie theater, sitting on a balcony, waiting to see light. Like that, there's no light. And this is supposed to be like, I think, a joke about Glasgow, that there's no light in Scotland. Like everything's just overcast and gloomy and dull. And that he's waiting there for there to be light. So he's obsessed with finding a dawn, finding like that era of it. And then when he lives on that boarding house, everything's like he doesn't do anything. He doesn't know what he's doing. And he's invited down into like these quote unquote depths of hell, quote unquote, into the underground, which is legitimately, if you take everything at its face value, underground. Like he goes through a mouth and this mouth speaks to him, and it's like very surreal and says like, take off all your clothes, go down head first. If you don't, like bad shit's gonna happen. And he goes down like feet first and like ends up like in this hospital where he's recovering. And outside of what he sees outside this window in his bed, in his like recovery room, is like the sun and mountains and fields and all this stuff. And the doctor's like, none of that's real. That's being broadcast from elsewhere. This is just a screen in which you're seeing like a replica of it. We're under a mountain here. So he does go down into those depths. So it is set up to mimic that at the beginning here. To what end, I'm just going to leave sitting because I'm not entirely sure at this moment. But I do know that like we will next week, in fact, jump from Lanark and his life into a different character that's very similar to him in a much more realistic setting. That this sort of like bizarreness is only in parts 3 and 4, in books 3 and 4, and is not in books 1 and 2. But back to your point, Kai, yeah, it's weird because it starts with book 3. It starts like in Mid-Rust, and you're like, I don't know where we are, and we're not in a place that's like realistic.
I mean, it doesn't feel not realistic. I mean, it felt very realistic to me in terms of there's a cafe that like, you know, it says like customers under 30 and in clicks of 5 or 6, like that's just where they go, because every place else, like they say, they're like the coffee's bad, the lighting's bad, the whole dump teams with poofs and wogs and Jews. Let's start the fashion going somewhere else. And someone else is always like, there is nowhere else. Like, this is our place. Like, I think essentially being like, we are those things. Like, this is our people. No, I don't, it's not, it doesn't feel unreal or jarring. I actually initially was like, oh, did I just end up with a screwy copy that had been like misprinted or whatever? And I have a lot of questions about the as I'm dabbling, like 10 or 12 books in dabbling of typesetting open letters titles. I have a lot of questions, and I understand that the book gets very, very creative with the typesetting later on as I flip through. But like, I have a lot of questions about the spacing decisions to fill up the pages in these first 7.
I know, and this is something like, if you don't have the book and you're listening to this podcast or watching it, this might not totally track, but it is spaced and designed weirdly. So the paragraphs are not indented. A new section, generally how we lay out a book is that if there's a new section, there's a blank line, new section, it's like justified left for the first paragraph, and then everything's indented after that. In this case, after a break, it's indented, and then all the paragraphs ensuing are justified left. So it's like backwards in that way. It's also like, it has that feel of being like a little off. And I know that from this interview that Alistair Gray designed all these books. Like, he designed Poor Things too. He had everything was like, he wrote it and designed it and then added in a lot of the drawings. Like, he didn't, those aren't part of the initial text. They came afterwards. But like with Poor Things in particular, and I don't think this book has it. I don't see it here. But in Poor Things, there are sections that are handwritten because they're letters. So they're like written in like true handwriting. And some of them are even like blurred as if it's been rained on, or like there's been like moisture applied to the ink. So it has like a truly visual element that doesn't work exactly as like as a true written medium. Like, thinking of it as like an ebook with just the text and none of the design, it would be losing like part of his idea. And I think LANARK being his first book, published in 1981 of all things, like, it doesn't seem that long ago for someone who's like has this reputation. 1981 doesn't feel like that ancient to me. But it is his first book, and it's published by a very small press in Scotland, Canongate, that still exists to this day. It's run by this guy named Jamie Bing, who's like notoriously like a good drinker and a partier. And I have friends that work there too that I really, really like. And they still exist, and they are like a small independent Scottish press. And to have this book come out from them is kind of interesting, both from a publishing perspective, but also from like, this guy seems like such a huge deal now. And in many ways, like 1981, having your first book come out from the small press feels like a good, wholesome, like writer story, that there is success that can come from these kind of operations. But it is that he was involved in a lot of like the design of stuff. He references again in this
passing judgment on his typesetting skills.
Yeah, you're like, fuck his typesetting. This guy sucks.
Well, no, it's funny. I'm here for it. I get it. I don't have any problem. There's one Dubravka Ugreshik book that we published where she did not want indents. And I remember you asking me and like a couple of readers being like, that's weird. And I'm like, I know, but I indented things. And the translator came back to me and said, take them all out. Dubravka does not want them. And that's fine. But I'm saying like page 12, like that should be Page 12, that should be indented. That's a mistake. Someone should have indented that, I think. It's the only one that's not indented.
Is it the next? Oh, mine is. Look.
Oh, no shit. Mine is not.
Yeah, so these are... Yeah, you guys have newer versions than I do. Mine's from years ago, so someone must have relayed it out and made a mistake.
Ooh. Ooh.
Yeah, mine is from ages ago. Like, I bought this in Scotland, like back in 2011, or not 2011, like 2007, like a million years ago.
You're so emo. You knew it when. I've got I have the page 12 indented copy. Okay, that's how.
I'm like, that's my Riz, right? That's how you use that word. The I don't think it is. That's so interesting. So it is slightly different.
Here's something that jumped out for me in this first section, and I'm really kind of curious to track where this goes. And it's on page 23, how he ends this chapter. It's at the bottom half of that last paragraph. It says, I believe there are cities where work is a prison and time a goad and love a burden. And this makes my freedom feel worthwhile. My one worry is the scab on my arm. There is no feeling in it, but when I grow tired, the healthy skin around the edge starts itching. And when I scratch the scab spreads. I must scratch in my sleep. When I waken, the hard patch is always bigger. So I take the doctor's advice and try to forget it. This idea of like things collapsing around you, this weird, like nightmarish fever dream hellscape, and this growing scab that only itches before I scratch it in my sleep. Like I don't know, if I try to unpack what that actually means, I find that really interesting and really arresting. So I'm really kind of curious if this speaks to what happens with this life as we go through it.
Right.
So I looked up dragon skin or whatever it is, and the very, very fun for me. The Google search hits, it went straight to just like, what is LANARK about? Like it just immediately cut to that. But then you go a little deeper and it's like, it's essentially eczema. Like it's supposed to, I was like, oh, okay. No, that
Dragon Scale was in Game of Thrones. And I wonder if George R.R. Martin had read LANARK and is ripping it off for his dragon scale or whatever that skin disease they have on that.
Is he Scottish?
No, he's a mouth breather.
Okay. He's from Ohio.
Yeah.
We haven't offended Ohio yet on this podcast this season, so we'll start now.
As we know from certain Instagram cookers, Ohio's very adept at offending itself.
Oh my God, the worst.
This would sell an eczema drug, being like, oh, it grows while you scratch it in your sleep, and you gotta get that under wraps. You're gonna wake up with a sentient dragon arm. I love how the dragon arm, he's like talking to his landlady, and the dragon arm is just like, cup of tea, like shut up.
Yeah. I really like the that metaphor too, of like the thing that you notice a flaw and it's like bothersome, but you try and forget it, you try and ignore it, and in your sleep you pick at it and pick at it and pick at it and pick at it, and it grows and grows and grows until it takes over. I really like that too. And I had the same experience, Kai. I looked up multiple things that would just like led me back to LANARK. Like it was constantly like I'd Google something and be like in LANARK. This happens with the other place that happened with. I was finished editing Enrique Villamatas's Montevideo, and in Montevideo he has like trillions of references to authors like Rodrigo Frazan, Sergio Shafak, like a lot of people that we publish or that we know are in there. And then there's like this like Marianne Moore. I was like, that sounds like a real author. And it's not. Like some of them are totally made up. And there'll be times where I'll be like, is this spelled right? And I'll look it up and it'll just like lead back to Montevideo. That was happening with that book and with this book, where I started to feel like I'm in a world in which I am just in these books. There's no like outside reference anymore. It's just like to itself. Like Google like exists within here.
Yeah.
Yeah, the dragon thing is amazing. I like this. Oh God.
No, I just want to go back to just put a pin. I want to go back to the dragon skin.
Okay. Go for it.
Oh, we're at the pin. Okay. So you both pointed out the part where it's like, my one worry is the scab on my arm and how it grows and he must scratch in his sleep. But then you jump forward and also his landlady is like, she's like, you should probably like go out and find some work because that happened to my husband and it happened to all the tenants. And then there's this element of people disappearing. And what I'm curious is if that's some sort of commentary on just like the medical and health industry, or not industry, but like the perception of external ailments in that time period, where it's like, like you've got some weird thing, like you should probably just get a job and make some friends and it'll go away.
Right. The yeah, it reminded me of there's a Hal Hartley movie. I think it's Trust, but it might be one of the others. They all have single word titles where like the woman's like, why do you come home and just watch TV all the time? He's like, because work makes me sad and angry. And is just like drinking beer and watching TV. And she's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like that's what work does. And I I feel like that sort of thing of like, you're kind of a mess. You have this like this anxiety that's like growing on you that you're picking at, this existential, taking it as like an existential philosophical bit. And that work relieves that because work gives you a thing to focus on that's not your inevitable doom and like the fact that you're not, focusing on things or accomplishing things. One of the bits I think is interesting as like I know we're sort of running out of time, but one of the things I think is a hook for the future is on page 27 and 28 when he's in the dance club or they're in the mansion where there's a party going on and Goopy or Dobby or whatever his name is like leads them into like
Loopy.
Whatever. I don't know why I can't remember that, but it's like it's just not there. But he leads them into this dance party. They're in this dance thing in this mansion, and he's like, I know that woman, and I've seen her face before. And they're like, what? And he's like, no, I've seen her before I came to the city. I know her face, but I can't remember everything else. So he goes to dance with her, and he's like, I think I know you well. And she's like, I doubt it. He's like, I killed you, didn't I? And then like everything stops, like record scratch. And she's like, this guy thinks he killed him. Get the fuck away from me. And that stops. But I feel pretty certain that that's like a clue to like what might be coming in parts 1 and 2, and sort of backfill that relationship. But that's one of the things that like sort of ties you to the future here, from these first 70 pages, anyways.
The way they describe themselves and describe other people. He's like, who's that big blonde over there? And like in the beginning, Frankie's like, how you like my belly?
Yeah.
Little bitch. Like, you're not very funny. Like, oh, Jesus.
It's so blunt.
It's like a really weird backhanded body positivity.
It truly is. There's right before that was a section I thought you would like, Brian, where he's talking, it's at the party, a chapter 4 party, and he gives Sludden the pages that he's wrote, the story. And Sludden's like, these suck. And he's like, well, I wish you would have read it carefully. He's like, all I need is 2 pages. I could tell that you don't count. And he's like, if a writer doesn't enjoy words for their own sake, how can the reader enjoy them? Like, yes. I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, how do you feel about this as also a writer, Brian?
I was trying to find where that was at because it was actually something I
25.
Yeah, I put that in there. Yep. That, more often than not, when like the writers put in their jokes about the writing process and the writing, it hits home pretty perfectly, and this does as well.
Yeah, I'm in the book on Dalkey that I'm working on. Like one of the sections that's forthcoming is a series of bits and about writers writing about writing, which is generally like the Dalkey vibe. One of the big things is like people trying to work out how to write a book or how to tell a story. And some of it's from like the Nouveau Roman, the French writing group from like the 50s and 60s that, and before then, that was like trying to like describe things and used repetition and used various ways to like put you in the point of like, if you were creating this, here's what you're creating. And then there's all the ones that like lead forward from that are like this version of like, oh, here's how the struggle to like write something or to create something. And here's like the things that you're dealing with. And like the Rodrigo Frazan books, like Invented Part and whatnot, are truly that of like, how do you create something when you don't have like an idea? Where does that come from? How does a writer become a writer?
It comes from male authors who are divorced or going through a divorce, and it's like a sad dad trope.
No, there's an innumerable times that like a girlfriend is like, you should write a book, you loser. And like, why don't you write something people want to read? Like, if I write something I want to read, will you like give me a blowjob? And they're like, maybe. And then it's like, that's the whole book after that is like trying to write that book that earns you a blowjob is like the true male protagonist writer from a Dalkey catalog. I'm glad that nobody listens to us at minute 50. So like I can drop in that. This is going to get us banned from YouTube.
Honestly, if more authors or translators just asked for sexual favors instead of money, this would be a much more lucrative business for us.
Fact. So
bring us your genital eagerness, which was a great phrase.
That ties into my line of the week for this section is from page 35. His heart and penis harden in angry amazement, which is like, yes. An angry amazement.
What was that? Angry amazement. That really is like, well, that's an interesting twist of words.
I love it. I was like, yeah, absolutely. My penis hardened in angry amazement. So anyone else have a favorite line from this section? Kind of all over the place.
I do, but I'm curious, why is it because of a time constraint that you guys are not talking about really beyond page 40 that much?
Let's go on. We can go on.
I'm just curious.
I think Brian has more of a time restraint than the two of us.
I was just curious.
What beyond page 40 do you want to talk about? I have one bit is that I really like to speak of bits is on page 58. This comes up for the second time where LANARK is trying to find out about his world around him and ask questions. And people are always like, I don't know. I'm a doctor, not a geologist. Or like, I'm a writer. I'm not a geographer. He's like, what city am I am? And they're like, I don't know. I'm just a bank clerk. I'm not like the city representative. Like, I love that as a bit where it's just like the idea of like seeking knowledge is like befuddled because people have to have their speciality. That's a very Kafka vibe as well. Like I do like going beyond page 40. One of the things I think is really cool about the book is that it does have that Kafka-esque impulse to it, but it doesn't beat it to death the way that a lot of other like books that are like, this is like a Kafka book seem to do. Like there is like the waiting in the he gets to the town inside of his novel, he gets to the town, Dobby brings him to like the place where you get welfare and welfare checks, and there's like an endless line, and he goes up to the front and they like send him through all these various like machinations, and they're like, just wait, we'll call you eventually. And that moment is very Kafka, like the castle in particular sort of vibe where you're like stuck in a bureaucratic process that doesn't make a lot of sense and is time consuming and is befuddling. And yet like it doesn't waste a lot of time here on that. Like it doesn't dwell in that. Like he just like sits there and is like, yeah, this is boring. And this woman comes that turns out to be Susie, who disappeared, which is another thing we should talk about. So Susie is essentially his neighbor who has 3 kids, and she is waiting next to him for this welfare thing. And she's like tapping a lot and smokes 23 cigarettes in a row. And he's like, wow, she's like a new waiter because she's like, you know, antsy. And all the rest of us are sort of like betrodden and broken down and whatnot. But that's like a couple paragraphs. Like I feel like the Kafka impulse is to like dwell in that area and be like, here's another form of bureaucracy. Here's another layer of insanity to this. Here's another thing that's problematic. And this just sort of like cruises past it in a very good way. But to sort of circle back to that. So Susie is like, oh, I can bring you to my boarding house where I live. My neighbor has an empty room because someone vanished. And there are several references to people just disappearing. And he sees someone disappear as well. Gloopy. Yeah, Gloopy vanishes.
Which is like a really David Lynchian, like moment. It was freaky.
Yeah, if Gloopy is like the midget from the Red Room, that's beautiful. Like I want to envision that guy dancing around, speaking backwards, and like being Gloopy.
There's a lot of rain, a lot of wet. It's very wet book.
That's what she said. But then Susie vanishes and then he vanishes essentially. So like one of the ideas is like, what if their vanishing is like going down these tunnels down to like the underground part where like the doctors are and this institute, which is referred to as an institute, not as like a hospital, not as like anything else. It's the institute, which is also interesting. And I mean, what you're going back to what you said at the very beginning, Kai, that opens with book 3 is also interesting that we have like essentially the climax what you would expect if the book was ordered like in a traditional Frags triangle way, is that this would be the climax, and then we'll get the denouement when we would normally get it in book 4 at the end of this book. But in some ways, like the climax isn't so far through the 70 pages, doesn't really build, because it does feel like an introduction and not like you're reaching some crescendo. But that might change once we hit the end of it and go back to books 1 and 2, that suddenly a climax seems pertinent.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really interesting like trick for like a writer's structure to use.
Yes, agreed. Sorry.
Brian, do you have comments on the structure of this?
No, not yet. I don't know enough about it I'm fine starting it at 3, because like you're saying, if you think of like, if there's 4 parts, the third part should be, the apex. So yeah.
One of the things that I didn't go back and look this up. Oh, what you're saying about the dragons thing. One of the things that's in his biography is he wrote a book called an autobiography in 2010 called A Life in Pictures, that outlined the parts of LANARK that were based on his own experiences, including how his mother died when he was young, how he went to art school, and how he suffered from chronic eczema and found difficulty in relationships with women, which, come on, buddy. Like, who doesn't? Like, that's like a given.
That's why he was so excited when he's like, Rima has it too. And she's like, ew.
Yeah.
Connections. No, that's not a connection.
Also worth noting is he died in 2019, one day after his birthday. So he died on December 29th, 2019, was born on December 28th, 1934. So what is that, 85? So up there.
And I don't know how it's going to connect or not, but I know, like, if we're thinking with Dante, or if we're thinking like biblical texts, leviathans and dragons and those sort of things typically represent chaos and disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is like some descent into purgatories and hells, and dragons kind of check out. So
we'll see. Yeah, for sure. So just like, this is like you said, the prototype to Game of Thrones. I don't know. Do you guys have anything else you want to talk about here? I think that the next bit will be very illuminating. I forget how far we go. It's on I'll link to it and I can look it up in a second. But essentially, we go through the end of book 3 and then have the prologue. And then the prologue leads into book 1. So we will get like a weird, next week will be a weird sort of like commentary in which we move through like a strange ordering in which we go from 3 to 0 to 1 rather than like 3 to 4 or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Anything else? You guys have a favorite line that you want to share? I shared mine. Angry amazement.
Brian? Okay. I do, yes. On page 37, kind of in the middle of the page, when Rima's kicking him out, he was drowned in nightmare now, lying on the bottom of it as on an ocean bed, yet, sorry, the spacing is really throwing me off. Yet he could breathe. He said, as in LANARK said, "You're trying to kill me." And Rena says, "Yes, but I won't manage. You're terribly solid." She finished dressing and slapped his cheek briskly, saying, "Come on, I can't apologize to you again. Get up and get dressed."
Perfect. So Brian's computer died, so he is gone. It's just the two of us. And I will look real quick. So for next week, for next Thursday, we'll be doing this live again, and we'll be through chapter 12, which is page 129. So another like 50 pages or so. It does get us through the very beginning, the very first chapter of part 1, which will be interesting to see. Until then, please like, rate and review us, smash the like button, follow, do all that stuff, share it with your friends, and we will be back next week to talk more about LANARK by Alistair Gray.
Bye.